Welcome back to Media7. The case of the murder of Manawatu farmer Scott Guy turned from a mystery to a media sensation recently when his brother-in-law, Ewan McDonald, was charged with the crime. Like a cast of characters in search of a plot, the story has been seized on by news media, notably in this 60 Minutes item.
I just feel like it's someone else's life and I'm looking in and it just doesn't feel like me. It's not my life, it's not happening to me.
The police had frustratingly few clues. There were no witnesses, no weapon recovered. It was a classic whodunit. Ewan McDonald's lawyer, Greg King, told the court his client would vigorously fight the murder charge.
His advice, however, is that the murder case remains unsolved. He denies any involvement whatsoever in the killing of Mr Guy and instructs counsel that that charge will be defended.
McDonald is also facing 6 other charges, which have been suppressed. While there has been some speculation as to motive, 60 Minutes cannot discuss Ewan McDonald's guilt or innocence, or what evidence the police may have. He must be given a fair trial.
I'm joined now by Auckland media lawyer Tracy Walker. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you.
I have to say that little bit at the end of that clip there, 60 Minutes couldn't possibly discuss Ewan McDonald's guilt or innocence, and then the item goes on to directly comment on the relationship of the deceased and accused. I mean, how can that be?
Well, we're a long way from trial, and that's a pretty important factor in the assessment of whether a publication is in contempt. I think that's pretty important. Secondly, I think this is a case of intense public interest, and one in which the police certainly engaged with the public during the inquiry phase. It'd be pretty surprising if all comment and all media publications suddenly ceased upon arrest. So I think those factors, plus the third factor being, I think there's been incremental creep over the last 20 years. This sort of broadcast is not particularly surprising at this stage.
This distance from the trial thing is quite a key factor, isn't it? Because I was interested last time we looked at the Urewera trial earlier on this year. We had to take out things that the Prime Minister said on the 6 p.m. news in 2007 because they might have been prejudicial in 2011.
Oh, there's no doubt that timing is one of the key factors. Some guidance has been given by the courts in the past. In the Gisborne Herald case, there was a suggestion that 6 months is a bit of a touchstone, but it all depends on the circumstances. It depends on the content, it depends on the type of publication, manner, level of detail, etc. And in this case, primarily that 60-minute piece was the emotional response of the wife of the accused, and that's not really likely to weigh very heavily, I believe, in a juror's mind.
It does beg considerable emotional sympathy, so you don't think that's a factor?
No, not so far out, and when it is the wife of the accused. I mean, there's been, again, some judicial comment to that effect. We've seen it in the past, and really it's had they descended into matters that would squarely be put before the jury, even this far out, there may have been an issue. But it all depends on context.
Do you think the line would have been pushed this far 20 years ago?
Look, there has been incremental creep, and there's no doubt about that. And we're seeing a significant difference in the way media report crime, both prior to and at time of arrest and leading up to trial. I think in part that's due to some empirical evidence, namely the Warren Young report commissioned by the Law Commission, that juries aren't really impacted or influenced by media publicity.
They're more sophisticated than
they are
we
more
give them credit for.
sophisticated, yes.
Yeah, I wonder whether juries too have become more sophisticated, that perhaps they don't necessarily believe everything that they read in the papers.
Well, I think once in trial, the jury is directed by the judge, and their ability to focus on the evidence presented in court is significant.
Perhaps we should actually discuss what sub judice actually means. The rule says that you can't comment on the case that's before the courts. What does before the courts mean? Does it mean a trial is scheduled?
The sub judice period starts at arrest or when an arrest is imminent, and it goes to the end of the appeal period. Now, the rule doesn't say that you can't comment at all. The test is whether there's a real risk of prejudice. That means not a fanciful risk, but a real risk as a matter of practical reality.
Do you think the Crown will be looking at the Scott Guy case, keeping an eye on it? Because there has been, particularly in the local papers, which you may not have seen, there's been an enormous amount of comment on it.
Oh, there's no doubt. The Crown and Defence Counsel will be looking very carefully at the media. There have been many arguments, both on appeal and during the trial process, about the impact of media. There have been some appeals against conviction which have succeeded, but those are relatively few.
Another case which has come up recently is that of Tiki Tane, who was arrested for disorderly behaviour likely to cause a disturbance or something like that. Greg O'Connor, the president of the Police Association, stood up on TV news and gave what appeared to be an account of events. It was uncontested, it was on the news. Does that not push the line?
Well, certainly the level of detail was much more than you might expect to see. But again, we're a long time from trial. It's a matter of intense public interest. It involves use of police powers. Those are matters that should be debated, in my view.
What about the Operation 8 film? Bill Hodge has already said, having only seen the trailer, that he thinks it might well be in contempt. Do you think they are at risk?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't seen the film, and I wouldn't want to comment just based on a snippet taken out of context. Currently, that trial is a judge-alone trial, although leave to appeal to the Supreme Court on the issue of whether it's judge-alone or jury has, I understand, been filed. If leave is granted and the issue goes before the Supreme Court, there is a possibility of a jury trial, and that changes that dynamic significantly.
Because the judge is deemed less likely to be influenced by what he reads in the papers.
The orthodox view is judges are not influenced, but that doesn't make the law of contempt redundant. More latitude is given, but the fact is that law of contempt doesn't just protect the fairness of a particular trial, it protects the administration of justice overall. So if public perception is impaired because of a prejudicial publication, then that's a risk in the contempt.
Now, I do want to get on to another issue that's on your turf, the file sharing bill, which has been passed to much controversy and under urgency. What do you make of what actually passed?
Look, I think there's been a lot of noise about the termination or suspension provision, but overall it's a compromise act. It's got a bit for everyone, and there are checks and balances within the Act's provisions that I think are fairly even.
David Farrer in his blog expressed the view that the internet side had gotten about 80% of what it wanted, including the tribunal, which wasn't there in the original provision, and that the rights holders had gotten virtually nothing. Do you think he was right?
No, I don't agree with that. What rights holders got is a fast-track mechanism for enforcement, one which they desperately needed, because the fact is each individual infringement is of low economic impact or value. But when you aggregate them, which is the big picture that rights holders look at, it's a very significant economic issue. So they got a fast-track procedure, but as I say, there are checks and balances. There are a number of hoops that rights holders have to go through. So overall, absolutely a compromise, I have no doubt about that.
And one big change is that ISPs can now charge back to the rights holder the costs of pursuing the individual who's infringing. What impact do you think that will have? Will that make it less likely that there will be claims?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if rights holders are right about the economic impact, they need to put their money where their mouth is and go through this process. Secondly, as you know, the suspension or termination provision hasn't been activated yet. Now, rights holders are not going to be able to persuade the minister, I believe, to activate this provision unless they can show they've tried the current process and it hasn't been effective as a deterrent.
Do you think it is an appropriate deterrent, removing someone from the internet? I mean, in this day and age, there are people who believe that to be connected is to be a citizen.
Look, I have no doubt that being connected to the internet is a critical part of information gathering and life today. But the reality is it's not about disconnection to the internet per se. It's about being disconnected to the particular provider that you're engaged with at the moment. And I don't see anything in the Act that stops you hopping from one provider to another. So we're not talking about termination per se. It's really the inconvenience of switching over.
Which isn't a great inconvenience. It's less of an inconvenience than the rights holder having to go to court to try and pursue it, which is going to be the case.
Right.
The tribunal can't order that, even if it's enacted.
Look, the real problem is going to be that those who are recidivist infringers are probably very tech savvy and will escape detection in the first place. This is about deterring mums and dads whose teenage kids are file sharing.
How does this, just briefly, how does this compare with similar laws which are popping up in other countries?
Well, the provisions aren't identical, but certainly there are two aspects. First of all, safe harbour provisions for ISPs in exchange for the ISP cooperation in enforcement is pretty common. Australia, US, two examples. Other jurisdictions too have this sort of three-step or multi-step regime, a gradual response system, but they're in various stages of activation and hotly debated pretty much everywhere.
Well, we'll see what everyone else does, and B, how well this one works. Tracy Walker, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks also to Abby King-Jones and Errol Wright, and thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.